Okay, in this recording I'm going to work out Chapter 3, question number 13. It wants us to create an invoice class to track items and invoices and then see how much people should pay for that invoice. So I'm going to read through the question real quick. Create a class called invoice that a hardware store might use to represent an invoice for an item sold at the store. An invoice should include 4 pieces of information: a part number, which is a string, a description, which is also a string, a quantity, which is an int, and a price per item, which is a double. And then we should make a constructor so that people can make new invoices, and we should also have a set and get method for each of those 4 instances, instance variables, so that we can change or update or retrieve the information that we set to be the description, price per item, part number, or the quantity being purchased. And then after that it has us do a couple other things too, but we'll start with that part right now. So to do that, or actually I'll show you what the final one should look like first. When we're all done, we should have these 2 classes, invoice test and invoice, and I'm going to run my program just to show you what it should look like. So first it'll prompt you for the part number, and since it's a string, I'm just going to, well, we can do part number 124. And it tells us that we set it right to 124, and now it's asking for a description, so let's say it's a laptop. And then it tells us again that we set our description to laptop, and now it wants us to enter a quantity. I'll enter 14. And now it wants a price. So let's say that the laptop's $245.87. And it'll return at the end that the total invoice costs $3,442.18. So this is what the program should look like when it gets done. Let's start from the beginning. Okay, so I'm going to open up, I keep on closing out BlueJ, I'll open it up again. And I'm going to make a new project. And I'm going to call it 313 example. I'm going to close out the old one. And then now that we have that open, we have to make our 2 classes. If you look, it tells us to make an invoice class, and it also tells us to make down here an invoice test class to run that invoice class. So we'll make both of them. It's very similar to how we've been doing question number 11 and question number 12. It's just the book doesn't have starting information on this one, so we have to make it up completely on our own. So we'll start with making the invoice class. And I'll make a new class called invoice test. Okay, so now we have both of our classes made. Now I'm going to go over to our invoice class so we can start working on that. Instead of, I know in the last 2 videos I've said to clear out all the information in here, but we want to keep this public class here so we can continue working with it. We can delete all this stuff out. We can keep this public invoice part here, because this is going to be what our constructor uses, is this part right here, but we can get rid of all this here too. So you should be left with something that looks like this. You can also get rid of the x equals 0 part. We're not going to be needing that. So now if we go back to the question, it wants us to come up with a way to record the part number, part description, quantity, and price, and it wants us to do it in a way that we can set and get all those. So if you remember back to question 11 and question 12, we have to make a private variable for each one of those. So right up here, right after the main class method starts, I'm going to make 4 private variables. So the first one says it wants to be the question specifies it should be a string for the part number. The second one is a string for part description. The third one is an integer for quantity. And the fourth one is a double representing the price of the product. So I'm going to make a private string called part number, and then a private string called part description, and a private int called quantity, and a private double called price. Okay, so now I have my four variables that my invoice can keep track of. So this is the four variables that are inside that invoice class instance. So we can update and set and mess around with these variables. So let's continue. Let's work on our constructor here. So this is going to be the constructor. You have to have this invoice be the same as the main class invoice, otherwise you'll receive an error. So just leave that alone like that. And then remember, we have to set all four of these variables that we made again in here, so that when it makes that new invoice, it contains all four of those variables. So we're just going to go part number. And since we don't have it equal to anything when you make it, I'm just going to do a blank string, because it's a string up here, so I'm just going to put a blank string in here. Part description, same thing, a blank string. Our quantity is an int, so I'm going to set that equal to 0. And price is a double, so I'm going to set that to, like your money would be with 2 decimal points. So that here our constructor's done. So we accomplished part of the question. But now the question wants us to be able to set and get part numbers, part descriptions, quantity, and price. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to enter down, and we're going to work on the part number first, since it's in order to get and set it. So I'm going to go here and put part number just to be easier to read. And then we're going to start with being able to set the part number. So if you look back to question 11 and 12, we're going to set it up exactly the same way, but we're going to call it something different. So public void set part number, and it's a string. And then remember, we haven't set up at all our invoice test class over here, but we will in a minute. So we're going to finish this first, or most of it, and then we'll go over there and start working with these class methods inside invoice test. But for now, we still know that to set the part number, we're going to need incoming information from that other class. So for right now, we can just make up a string name to make it work before we even have it set up in invoice test. So that'll make sense in a minute. So incoming part number. And remember, this you can make up to be anything you want. I just call it incoming part number because that information for the part number is incoming into this class method. And then inside the set part, we do it the same way we did in problem 11 and problem 12. We're just going to set part number up here, the private string, equal to the incoming part number that's coming from the user's input from invoice test. Just like that. And now we'll do our get method for part number. So same way again as question 11 and 12 almost. We're just going to keep the naming convention. Instead of set part number, it'll be get part number. And we have to think about this. When we get the part number is a string. So after public here, we're going to be returning a string, so we have to type string in here. And then we're going to do get part number. And then in here, we're just going to do the same thing we've been doing and return part number. So here we have it set up so we have our constructor to make new invoices, and we can also get and set part numbers right now. Now before I continue on with doing the other three that are very similar to the part number one, I'm just going to set up the main part of our invoice test so we can get that going. Okay, so here's our invoice test one, and this is, remember, going to be the class that references this this class over here. So this is going to be the master one. So I'm going to delete all this stuff up here. And we're just going to start off real basic like that, and then we're going to make our main loop public static void main string args, and then make sure to close that off. So now we have our main two loops. You know, we already know that we're going to have user input, so the user is going to have to type in the part number and part description and stuff. So while we're here, we might as well throw in the import scanner function or library. And then inside here, we're just going to do our scanner input to initialize the scanner. And now that we have that, we're more set up. We can use our scanner now, and we have our main loop. So now we got to think about what we want our program to do. So we're going to go down here, and the first thing we want to do is create a new invoice using our constructor. So we made our constructor over here. Now we want, when the user runs the program, we want to make them an invoice so that they can see what this class over here can do. Similar to question 11 and 12 again. So it's the same kind of stuff over and over again. So remember, when we start making a new invoice, we start here. We're going to start with invoice. And that's coming from this invoice class, so it has to be spelled the same. And then right here we can name it anything we want. In my example, I'm just going to name it my invoice. And remember, this invoice can be called, or capital I, camel casing. So this invoice can be called whatever you want. It doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to name it that for now. And then new, and then invoice, because this is the name of our constructor method right here, and so we have to put it like that. And then that's all we need to make the new invoice. Now after we're done with that, we can start asking the user for what name or what number they want for the part number. And that way we can start using our set and get part number methods that we made right here. So the first thing we're going to do is ask the user to enter a part number for their invoice. So I'm going to put a comment here so we know it's for part number. And I'm going to put a comment up here real quick. You don't have to say that this is the create new invoice part. And so we have our, now we can type in where we, to ask the user to enter a part number, so system.out.print. And then remember, we're going to need to take their whatever they type in is going to be set to the new part number. So we're going to have to make another variable in here to store that information to pass it on to this other class, just like we did in questions 11 and 12. So I'm going to make a new variable real quick called part number input that shows that it's the input of the user that we're just going to be passing on to this class. So that'll make sense in a second.